Good afternoon. My name is Cappy Powell, and I have the honor of serving on the Johann Fust Library Foundation board and of welcoming you all here today, and the privilege of introducing our speaker, Carol Armstrong. Also, to remind you to please turn off your phones. There will be time for questions after Carol's speech. If you didn't pick up a card and pencil, they will be distributed, so please use them. Somebody will be on sides to offer you to write a question, and we'll have her answer them. And I was supposed to announce that there would be a book signing. However, the book sold out. So thank you, everybody, but I think they are available at the Tides, so please support our local bookstore, too. I've had the lucky fortune to have known Carol since mutual friends of ours started a book club in Boca Grande 4 or 5 years ago. A lot of us are here today to support Carol. In 1992, Carol, a widow of 2 teenagers, was invited by friends in Cincinnati to participate in a celebrity golf tournament. And she said, "But I don't play golf." And they said, "That doesn't matter," so she went. Those same friends arranged for Carol to sit next to another friend of theirs. He was a nice dinner companion, and obviously a perfect gentleman, because when she left the event, he escorted her to her car. A couple weeks later, this gentleman called Carol and asked what she was doing. She didn't recognize who he was at first, but she told him that she and her son were getting ready to cut down a dead cherry tree in their yard. About 30 minutes later, their doorbell rang. Her son went to answer the door. And then he came to the kitchen and said, "Mom, why is Neil Armstrong standing outside with a giant chainsaw?" Neil Armstrong, the first man to land on the moon, an event that many of us can say exactly where we were at that time on July 20th, 1969, a name we all recognize, had come to help cut down Carol's dead tree. That started a friendship that developed to a courtship that became a marriage of almost 20 years before Neil died. When Carol married Neil, he came with boxes and boxes of manuscripts, personal papers, personal items, and memorabilia he had amassed in his career. Maybe some rocks, I don't know. Carol helped Neil organize his papers, which he donated to Purdue University, his alma mater. And I think there were even some old report cards in there. Carol, is that true, from Purdue? Carol and her family, and Carol when he was alive and with Neil, really wanted to protect his legacy, his name, his image, his NIL, for those of us who are following college athletics would call it. He didn't need the fame or fortune and didn't want to commercialize his success. When he died, he left a lot of what Carol affectionately called space crap.
I saw that in the Onion. I didn't say
that. Okay. I knew she'd correct me, but fake news is kind of what we're all about. But that space, whatever she called it, crap, turned out to be very valuable to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Carol donated many of his things to them when he died. In 2006, NASA presented Neil the NASA Ambassadors of Exploration Award. The ceremony took place at the Cincinnati Museum Center. The award included a moon rock. I hope you all had the opportunity to watch his acceptance speech of that award, which we have posted on the Johann Fust Foundation website, if you haven't seen it. He told the attendees about the cosmic journey of the moon rock that was a part of the award he received. Neil called this rock Bach. Carol is here today to tell us of the journey, from Bach's journey from the cosmic atmosphere to Earth to Cincinnati, and to being a part of a children's book. The speech was made in 2006. Carol turned it into a book last year. Carol, welcome.
Well, I don't have anything left to say now. All right, I made my notes, and at the top it said, "Speak slowly and don't mumble." So Neil once described himself, and I quote, he wrote this down, "I am and ever will be a white socks, pocket protector, nerdy engineer born under the second law of thermodynamics, steeped in steam tables, in love with free body diagrams, transformed by Laplace, and propelled by compressible flow. If you want to know more about the second law of thermodynamics, don't see me after class. For those of you who didn't know Neil, he was very witty, very whimsical, very quiet. His quiet, little sarcastic, it's called a Soto voice. I remember, for instance, he was sitting in my library before we were married. And I walked through and I looked down, he's reading the paper, and I said, Neil, do you know you're wearing one green sock and one blue sock? And he didn't even put the paper down. He didn't miss a beat. He just said, yeah, I have another pair just like it. You couldn't get past him. The first time he came to my house, he was walking down the hall to the library, and there's just, one step down to the library, and I went first, and he tripped. And I turned around and I said, well, Neil, that's one small step. He didn't laugh. Maybe it's because he couldn't hear me. Well, speaking of not hearing, Neil couldn't hear very well. You can imagine growing up around all those rockets and machines. And so he wore heavy hearing aids. And at night we'd be reading in bed, and suddenly he'd look over to me and he'd say, well, Carol, do you have anything else to say? Because I'm going offline. Oh, that's funny. He was one of the world's best pilots, helicopters, seaplanes, props, jets, testing the X-15 at Mach 4. But he was also the world's slowest driver. Once when he was driving 30 miles an hour, I finally said, Neil, I could get out and walk faster than this. And he smiled and said, well, Carol, if it isn't supersonic, it's just transportation. So you have to know the engineering mindset. It's very focused. And fortunately, my father was a scientist, so this was not totally alien to me. He never made sense either. We were trying to set a date to get married. We're just getting married in the living room of the town mayor. But we were trying to figure out a date. So I said, well, what does June 18th look like? He's at his desk. He shuffles through and he says, I have a golf game. And then he looks up and he says, I could change it. If you've ever visited the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., I don't know how many people have seen the lunar land. It looks like a 6th grade science project that maybe got a C. It's just made out of aluminum foil. So, and then they had what they called a computer. It had 9 keys. He mentioned that even back then, the little computers kindergartners had a lot more power. So to make sure they could get there, he took a sextant with him. And also making sure he could get there, somebody was kind enough to bring me this photograph. And Roger Howe had taken Neil on a fishing trip here in Boca Grande. This is a long time ago. And at the end of the trip, here's the captain. He said, Neil, I just have to ask, how did you navigate from here all the way to there? Neil just looked at him and said, well, I could see it the whole way. All right, let's see what else we have. Well, before I introduce you to more of Neil, I'll just share 2 non-scientific incidents that happened on the moon. When they were exiting the lunar lander, you okay? Move this. Okay, break my nose on it. when they were exiting the lunar lander, Buzz accidentally knocked the hinge off the door with his backpack. That's not good if you can't get back in. So Neil had a pen and he stuck it in the hinge to make sure they could open it again. This is not a real scientific era. And before that, when they were descending, they were having trouble. They were supposed to descend in one particular spot. And, Neil was like 30 feet up and he saw it was nothing but boulders. He couldn't land. So he was skimming the surface looking for a flat area, but he only had 10 seconds of fuel left. And NASA wanted him to abort because you have to have some fuel to leave the moon again, but he didn't. Then when they asked him why, he said, well, everybody knows when the gas gauge says empty, there's always a little bit left. So, as Cappy said, in 1966, NASA honored Neil with a small slice of the moon to be displayed at the Cincinnati Museum Center. For his presentation to the museum, Neil wrote a little story about a rock, and he named him Bach. And it wasn't until a few years later that I thought it would be a cute children's story. So now, boys and girls, just relax. Now, this first part is actually true. He told me, well, it's all true, but he told me this. When I was a boy, I dreamed I was high above the earth with only clouds for company. For as long as I could hold my breath, I floated. But I could not hold my breath forever. I'd wake and watch the moon drifting by my window, wondering at all it must have seen and imagining how it was made. I don't know if you want me to show the pictures. You can't see them anyhow. Just buy the book. I learned that when the Earth was very young, 4.5 billion years ago, it was involved in a great celestial fender bender. A smaller planet smashed into Earth. The collision sent billions of tons of molten rock into orbit. Over hundreds of years, this rock merged and stuck together to form a sphere. The Romans called it Luna. The Greeks called it Selena. We call it moon. It was a turbulent and terrifying time on the moon. Lava flooded up from below its surface, filling giant craters like hot soup in a bowl. Geysers of erupting gas shot globules of molten rock into the sky. 500 million years of chaos passed before the moon began to quiet down. As the crust cooled, it cracked. A piece of fresh young basalt broke off from a larger rock and rolled away. I call him Bach. Geologists, people who study rocks, have a saying, rocks remember. History is recorded in the minerals and marks of each boulder and pebble. During the next 4 billion years, Bach would see and remember many things. He saw the sun rise in the east and parade majestically across the sky to set in the west. Occasionally, he saw new stars would burn, a fiery brilliance against the velvet blackness of space. Constellations changed their shape as stars were born, burned for millions of years, and disappeared. Back then, the earth also rose and set. 600 million years went by, and then an asteroid struck Bach. It catapulted him into the sky toward a crater at a terrific height and speed. Bach held his breath for as long as he could, but eventually he fell. Skipping a time or two, he came to rest on the rim of a small crater. Part of his right side broke off when he landed. All his basalt neighbors were left far behind. He didn't know if they had been vaporized melted or blasted far away. Bach was alone. It took him about 500 million years to get over the experience and settle down before once more turning his gaze to the sky. The earth was, can't read, the earth was still there. It was in a state of terrible upheaval. Volcanoes turned its atmosphere to smoke. But when this cleared, Bach could see the blue of newly formed oceans. Continents would creep out of the sea, linger, and then slip once more back down below the waves. And swimming deep beneath those waves was the teeming, earliest, complex life on Earth. Another millennium went by. The moon was quiet now. Nothing ever happened. But on Earth, plants appeared. Amphibians developed, ventured out of the sea, and in time learned to live above water. And we call those Boca Grande iguanas. Dinosaurs roamed the earth, but they disappeared almost before Bach noticed. An entire chapter of Earth's history, there and gone in the blink of 170 million years. Bach was then a little over 3.5 billion years old and starting to feel sleepy. Through tired eyes, he glimpsed the rise of the mammals. He saw the earth turn into a giant snowball beneath the grip of the ice ages. Just before sleep enveloped him, he saw a new creature standing on two legs, holding a flint-tipped spear, staring at the moon. He slept deeply as the moon continued to accompany the earth on its endless journey around the sun. And so he missed the unfolding story of humankind. He missed Plato. He missed Hypatia. He missed Charles Darwin, Maria Mitchell, Bessie Coleman. He missed the birth of the boy who grew up to climb aboard a rocket destined for the moon. Bach couldn't have guessed that his nap would end with a rude awakening early one lunar morning. A peculiar creature was lifting him with an unusual metal device. He was roughly thrown into a box with some acquaintances he knew only slightly. Then the lid was dark. The lid was closed and it was dark. He felt a brief force as he's going back up, then a sense of weightlessness for a time. Flames burst outside the window, blotted out the blue of the earth as the space capsule streaked through the atmosphere, blazing like a comet. The heat stirred a deep and ancient memory in Bach, a memory from so long ago it seemed like a dream. He remembered the early days of the moon, the chaos and fire of its birth. He remembered he had been part of the earth. So millions of people all around were watching. They were holding their breath until they saw the space capsule floating beneath 3 bright parachutes splashing into the ocean, returning all on board safely to the place from which their journey began. And now you know some of Bach's history. You can go and see him in a museum in the United States, or at least a part of him. Chip off the old Bach, you could say. Perhaps you might try and imagine what he is thinking as he looks out at us looking at him. Does he see us as something new and different on this earth that he's watched for so long? Or like the dinosaurs, just another species that exists for a brief moment of geological time? After all he's seen, Bach must be very wise. But if you ask him about the Egyptian pharaohs, don't hold your breath waiting for an answer. He missed them. That's the end of Bach. But I do want to point out the artwork here is beautiful. And our artist's name is Graham Greene. He's out of the UK. And the book was published in the UK. I couldn't find a publisher in the United States. So, yeah, it was near Christmas time, and they said, well, we'd want a Christmas book, and this couldn't be out in time. So we went to the UK. And now you can get it from Random House Children's and Amazon. I got mine from Amazon. So are there any questions? No? Okay.
Carol, what was it like working with the artist? Did you share your visions with him, or did he come up with all of the pictures?
He came up with them. I had seen his work, and I loved it. And he did come up with a whole series of little Bach rocks. You can see those in the back of the book. I did pick one out of that. I picked the cutest one.
That's very cute.
That was it.
Had Neil planned to create a children's book, or was that something that you thought to do?
No, he was just giving us talk, and years later, I thought it was pretty cute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know he'd always been concerned that children weren't taking the hard sciences anymore. He was involved with the Academy of Engineering. That was a big problem for them.
Yeah.
And that's when we got into STEM. And, yeah.
Well, I know you're going to be reading to the children tomorrow, right? Are you reading?
I didn't know that, but I will.
Oh, I don't know. I knew there was something going on.
We read to them over at the parade grounds.
Oh, at the parade grounds.
Yeah, but that was impossible because the band was playing at the same time.
Do we have any more questions in the audience? Yes, Linda.
Carol, can you share with us when you found a box with some stuff in it in your house?
Oh, the bag? Well, first you have to know Neil was a hoarder, and that's not a pretty picture. I mean, he kept everything. I remember watching on television, and Buzz Armstrong was on there with all his big medals and everything, and I said, well, Neil, what is that? And he said, well, that's the Congressional Medal. And I said, oh, you don't have one? He said, yeah. I said, well, where is it? And he said, I have no idea. But later, after he died, you had to clean out his desk. And it was back there with discarded, expired Arby coupons. And remember Gyro Gearless in the comic books? That was it. Yeah. What was that the question? I forgot.
Another question. So thank you for doing this book. It's bringing it to life, and it's wonderful and so beautifully illustrated. As to Cappy saying, most of us of a certain age know exactly where we were when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Usually it's national tragedies, remember? And that was such an awe-inspiring, joyful moment. Did he ever talk that you can explain to us about the courage it took? I mean, I know to be a jet fighter.
Yeah, because that was never an issue. He was an engineer, and engineers solve problems. And that's why he was so good flying the X-15. I mean, you hear about Chuck Yeager, et cetera, but, well, Chuck can't hear me, but he'd cowboy that thing up and bring it down. He hadn't the slightest idea why it worked or didn't work. Yeah, he wasn't a scientist. He was just showing off. But no, the object of those flights was to see what went wrong and how to fix it. I know Neil's went wrong one time. This is the X-15 we're talking about. And they're supposed to study just the inside of loop of our orbit. And he skipped out into the atmosphere. And then there's no gravity. So he wasn't sure how to get this plane back into orbit. Or it eventually just let it sink and it went back in. And the planes were so fast, they didn't have wheels. They had skids on the bottom because wheels would burn up when they landed, and they landed on the dry ocean beds in the desert. But that was fun. He liked that. And then I read someplace after that he decided to go to NASA. I'm not sure it was that easy, because I think he liked the X-15s better. But he always dragged his feet on everything. And one of his friends told me, who was involved, that it was the last day to hand in your application. And he asked Neil, and Neil said, "I forgot." So he said, "Neil, write out an application." And he took it over and he put it under the pile.
Such great stories. Any other questions? Well, Carol, you're going to sign some books for us, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Carol. This is fascinating talk.